This is Professor Moylan. In this module, we get into issues in global marketing. Obviously, whenever things change dramatically and quickly, there are repercussions. And so we'll look at what some of those repercussions are of global trade. Call that issues in global marketing, if you will.
Remember the barriers to international trade or so-called trade protectionism. There's three major kinds. Again, tariffs, those are taxes on imports. Import quotas are limits on how many products are allowed in. And embargoes are bans on certain import or export products. Now, the conditions that affect international trade include cultural conditions, economic conditions, political and legal conditions. Cultural conditions include things like communication, verbal and nonverbal, time orientation, even religion. Economic conditions include infrastructure, resources and development, and currency exchange rates. Political and legal conditions include the overall political system and the political stability of the system. Now, you might wonder what's the risk? Well, if you directly invest in a foreign country and the political situation changes, your investment may be at risk. For example, a lot of oil firms invested in Venezuela and Iran back when those countries had more democratic regimes that were friendly to the United States. But when those regimes were toppled, uh, in both instances, they nationalized some of the companies that were there. In other words, they simply appropriated all of those assets, and the countries had no retribution whatsoever. Another political and legal issue is the country's approach with regards to things like corruption. Right now, a lot of U.S. companies are investing in Vietnam and Russia, and there's very, very different mindset about corruption and what is acceptable and not acceptable as compared to what is in the United States. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act that was mentioned earlier says that no matter where you're operating, you've got to follow the laws of the United States. Well, many people think that they're put at a disadvantage because the locals aren't operating under those restraints. Are multinational companies beneficial? And multinational companies are companies that operate in more than one nation. Are they beneficial? Well, some people say yes. The pros of multinationals include lots of jobs. Multinationals account for almost 1/5 of U.S. private sector jobs, and even more so of the wages. They tend to pay more. They provide 1/4 of the private sector wages. They disproportionately do R&D. They account for almost 3/4 of all R&D spending. And they lead to increased productivity. 41% of the increase in private label productivity is due to multinationals. So those would all be very, very positive things. Now, what are the cons? Well, a lot of multinationals are technology based. Technology is capital intensive, but that doesn't necessarily increase employment. Some think that multinationals support the governments where they operate. Those governments benefit the company, but not necessarily the country and its people. And some think that multinationals actually take away more wealth than they generate. One of the things about the interconnected global economy is that conditions in other countries impact conditions in your country. There's a saying, if America sneezes, then the rest of the world catches a cold. Well, you've got to understand and be able to forecast what's going on in other countries. You've got to understand those other countries around the world. The four countries that have been impacting globalization the most, and already mentioned, are the so-called BRIC countries: Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Brazil and Russia have seen both of their economies slow down quite a bit. China and India have as well, but they're still growing. China and India have two of the highest growth rates in the world. They're also the two biggest countries. They've got the two largest populations, but they've got the highest levels of income disparity. They've exploded in spending power, particularly in the upper classes because of that income disparity. Another issue in global marketing is so-called dumping. Now, dumping is when you sell an export product at a price lower than that charged for the same or like product in the home market of the exporter. In other words, you are dumping it elsewhere. This leads to competitive imbalance. One of the real positive effects of globalization has been a tremendous growth in free enterprise in developing countries, and a lot of that free enterprise is being funded by what's called microfinancing. Now, microfinancing is a relatively new concept. It only dates to 1976, but here's what it is. It's a concept that was pioneered in 1976 by a gentleman, an economist named Muhammad Yunus. He founded Grameen Bank, and that was the first bank to provide micro loans. That led to the Grameen Foundation and a similar organization, Kiva International. Those two are the leading microloan organizations. Now, what are microloans? What is microfinancing? It's providing small loans to individuals who traditionally would not have access to credit. It's providing those loans so that they can start enterprise. This is a poverty reduction method via enterprise building. It's not traditional aid. It's different than traditional aid. And the reason is borrowers have to repay the loan with interest. Now, the loans are easier to get because they are given without collateral. But in order to ensure that a great percent of the loans do get paid back, borrowers are organized into groups, and members of the groups together try to guarantee the loans. So microfinancing, as established in 1976 by Muhammad Yunus and the development of Grameen Bank, have been very important in the development of LDC enterprise or less developed country enterprise.